My concern, everyone's going to think it's crazy, but it's that there's a very, very low probability, but now probably much higher than it was, that the world marches towards using a nuclear weapon for the first time in a long time. And the reason is, as Sachs has pointed out so many times, there's significant material and industrial production shortages, not just in the US, but around the world, to support rising conventional wars that seem to be scaling all over. And there's going to be multiple fronts. And to feed those wars with conventional weaponry, there's a breaking point. Our cost of weaponry is 10x Russia's cost of weaponry, supposedly. I mean, I'm just quoting Sachs on this point. But if all that is true, at some point, these conflicts become really difficult to maintain. And if we're in the midst of a conflict, you may not be able to simply retreat or recede. At some point, the question is, well, how do we gain superiority again? And whether that's us or Russia backed into a corner, or Israel backed into a corner, who also has a nuclear arsenal, there's a couple of scenarios. There's like a million scenarios from here. There's a million realities we could live in from here, from today. But there's some number of them that end up with someone saying, I got to press the button. And remember, not all nuclear weapons are these things that wipe out a million people instantly. Some of them are small load tactical weapons. That is still very low probability, but much higher than it was a few weeks ago, that we find ourselves walking because of the fact that we're going to have multiple conflicts and burn through all this conventional weaponry, not have industrial production systems to support all these conflicts. But there's a bunch of countries that have a trump card. And once you start talking about it, it'll seem scary at first, then it'll get normalized, and then it'll become a question of when and where and how. And then all of a sudden, it's like, holy shit, this is a different world we're living in. That's a scary place I don't want to be in. Anything we can do to eliminate those paths from being walked, I'm in favor of, even if that means ceding strategic advantages today. I just don't think that that's a place we want to go.
There's like 9 nuclear powers. Who do you think is going to be the one who would actually use a nuclear bomb, Friedberg? Do you have some speculation there, or you just think everybody runs out of bullets and tanks and missiles and then they go to nuclear because they have nothing left?
I don't know. Look, I tend to think in terms of like, there are multiple parallel scenarios that can play out. So I don't have a point of view. Sure. I'm not going to say deterministically, I think this thing is going to happen. Again, I think this is very low probability.
Sure.
But I could see a bunch of scenarios emerging. Like, let's say that Russia's got their back against the wall and Putin's feeling lost and desperate and he needs to use a tactical weapon to, get some regional victory. Again, these tactical nuclear weapons, they're not necessarily the kinds of things that you would use to level Manhattan. Those exist, but there are other weapons in the arsenal that I get worried that someone says, we're backed in a corner, we have nowhere else to go, we can't win this thing conventionally, and we cannot lose. And that's the moment when someone says, let's start talking about this. And that conversation happens before it gets used. Then that conversation becomes normalized. And then suddenly it's not this thing. We all grew up in a world where this was never a real threat or risk or conversation. There was the Cold War and the dismantling, and we were kind of headed in a good direction for the last 40 some odd years. But now it's like, I don't see it going in that good direction anymore. So I'm just really nervous about that.
Yeah, I think you should be nervous about that. Let me give you a couple of examples. So first of all, I agree with Friedberg's point that humans who are convinced of the righteousness of their cause have a tremendous ability to wave away or justify any sort of tactical implications. So, for example, we did use 2 atomic bombs to end World War II. That wasn't the only time it was advocated. If you go back to, I think it was around 1950, MacArthur wanted to win the Korean War by using 20 to 30 atomic bombs. And his plan was to so thoroughly irradiate the border between China and North Korea that China would never be able to invade through an invading army for something like 50 years. Truman had to fire him because Truman didn't agree with the strategy. And by the way, MacArthur was not some crazy, he was not some like wacko. He was the most respected man in America in 1950, and Truman paid a huge political price for having to fire him. It was one of the reasons why Truman couldn't run for re-election again. So this idea that like rational people would never use these things, not true. The generals in 1962 during the Cuban Missile Crisis were all ready to take the nukes off the chain if the Soviets were willing to break the naval blockade. So, it's not just foreign powers who have rattled the saber on nukes. We've done it at various points through our history too. let me give you a more mundane example. Just earlier this year, Biden said that we were out of 155 millimeter artillery ammunition. And so we had to give Ukraine cluster bombs. Remember this? Just a year before, that same administration had said the use of cluster bombs was a war crime. So in other words, they were able to change their morality on the use of cluster bombs because tactically they were out of the type of ammunition they want to use. They had nothing left. So, I think this kind of reinforces Freeberg's point. Now, look at our inventory replacement times for key systems. This was a report by CSIS, that is a military think tank in Washington. What they show is that our industrial capacity is so hollowed out that it's going to take us 5+ years to replace our stockpiles of artillery ammunition, of javelins, of stingers, of Gimlers as another type of rocket system. And so we are like dangerously low on key types of ammunition. And yet, remember when 60 Minutes did that interview with Biden, they said to him, well, gee, if we're in a war, both on behalf of Ukraine and on behalf of Israel, doesn't that pose any trade-offs? And Biden's response was, no, we're the most powerful nation in the world. For good measure, he said, we're the most powerful nation in the history of the world. So he doesn't see any trade-offs. He doesn't see any limits on American power. Quite frankly, I think this is why he's dangerous, is because he still thinks that the U.S. is living in 1991. He's been in Washington for 50 years, and he only remembers the unipolar moment. All of his instincts and experience have been shaped by that period of time when the U.S. was the only superpower, that we were the global hegemon. We're no longer in that position anymore. First of all, Russia and China are strong. They are great powers too. And Iran is much stronger than Iraq. Iran is 4 times the size of California and has roughly 90 million people. And they got a lot of engineers. And even if we did want to attack them, it's not exactly clear how you would stage that attack. Just getting to Iran would require flying over some very dangerous territory. It's not clear we have the bases or the air clearance rights from allies to be able to even get to Iran. Moreover, Iran apparently has a very strong missile program. So they may even have the ability to fire missiles or hypersonic missiles at our aircraft carriers that are sitting in the Mediterranean Sea. So if we get in a war with Iran, it's no joke. This is not going to be shock and awe. This could be a very, very dangerous situation for the United States, which is why when people are just kind of making these idle threats, they should be very careful about that, because Iran is hearing that too, and they're getting ready. And one last point on that. Thanks to our destabilizing the Middle East with the Iraq war and the Syria regime change operation, Iran now has proxies in both Iraq and Syria. They've got Iraqi Hezbollah. They also have proxies in Yemen with the Houthis. And all of those groups could stage attacks on American military bases there.
We've gone down the worst case scenario here, use of a nuclear bomb, the United States invading Iran. Here's just a list of the 9 countries that are nuclear powered, and that have nuclear bombs rather than nuclear powered. And as you can see, Russia, US, China, France, UK, Pakistan, India, Israel, and North Korea. Israel denies they actually have them. And Pakistan has been the one who has been proliferating them, getting bombs to North Korea and helping Iran with their program. Iran obviously does not yet have a nuclear bomb, but we don't know how far they are because intelligence is sparse on that topic based on my cursory research. What's the best case scenario here, Chamath?
Sorry, Jake, I just want to be clear. I just want to be clear that I don't see nuclear use as likely.
Yes, that was Freeberg's point. Yeah.
Sorry, I did not say it was likely at all either. Not at all.
No, you said it's a small possibility, and we just spent 10 minutes talking about that small possibility.
I just want everyone, let's say something goes from 2% chance to 8% chance. It's now 4x in the next 20 years. That's a significant shift in risk. And I think there have been others like Ray Dalio, I think, or Warren Buffett. Some people have said that the chance of us using a nuclear weapon over a long enough period of time approximates 50 to 100%. It starts to get very high because, at some point, these things proliferate, the intelligence, the capabilities proliferate, they get into the wrong hands. There's all these different scenarios that emerge. So the probability might be low on any given period of time, but over a long enough period of time, these things become a real kind of concern.